Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our final installment of Snuneymuxw Culture and Lives Lived. And we are joined today by Dave Bodaly, knowledge keeper from the Snuneymuxw First Nation. And he's going to talk about Snuneymuxw stories and some genealogy. So we're really looking forward to this. Just a reminder that if you do have any questions for Dave, please put them in the chat and I will let him know your question. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Dave.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. In our cultural way, we lift our hands in front of us and we shake them twice and say Haichka. That means thank you in our language, and thank you to each of you for being here today. As you said, my name is Dave Bodaly. My traditional name is Lache from Snuneymuxw. I come from the Johnny family of Snuneymuxw. And this is in my studio in Nanaimo here at Bevan Park. It's the Red Barn. And the newest edition is way at the back there. I call him Sam. It's a spindle whorl that's about 30 inches. And it was something I had created for me, and Bo helped me with that one. So I can hear Bo's planer working in the next building, and that's where he's working at right now. He's got several projects on the go, partially for the work that Kate is doing over in the school there with the school's project. Yeah, so today I want to talk about a few different things. One of the things I want to talk about is the genealogy. As a genealogist, I've been working with many people over the years. I started in 1994 when I first moved home. So a little bit of my background, I had traveled to different places I used to live. I'm originally from Port Alberni, was born and raised there. But my mother is from the Nanaimo Reserve, my father's English ancestry. And so I traveled from Port Alberni to Edmonton, and while living in Edmonton for 13 years, I traveled to Europe, went into Africa, traveled to Central America, lived in the southern states. And through my First Nation status in 1988 or 1985, when the law changed, I was able to obtain First Nation status from my mom. So through that, then I was able to have dual citizenship in the US. So in the southern states in Florida, I worked as a photographer for Sears Portrait Studio, and then moved on to Dallas, Texas, where I was the assistant manager of a Sears Portrait Studio there. So quite a variety of things to live in that 13 years in Alberta. After that, I moved back home to my reserve here in 1994. I was here in 1994 for only 9 months to get to know my family, to meet my mom and her family here. And then unfortunately, my mother passed away in early 1995. So this year is 26 years. And this is the first picture I'm going to show is a picture of my mom and my dad. My father is of British ancestry and has ancestry going back 1,000 years from Northampton, England. But he's Canadian, been in Canada. But it's my great-great-grandfather on his side that was one of the families that lived in Northampton. So when I was in 1999, I went and I traveled over to Europe and traveled to Northampton to look up his family. And I found this neat old map. This is a map that was made in the 1700s of the Northamptonshire area. And my family comes from the north area here. And right next to my family is called Althorpe. And when I got to that area there, my family that I met there, they gave me a tour of the land and brought me to an old church in the land there and said my ancestors made that church in 1700. It's only a bell tower because the architect was a Bodaly, and it was spelled different than it is now. Mine's Bodaly, but it was spelled Bodily. And in this 1800s, the word came in called bodily harm. And so we could no longer keep our name as Bodaly. So they changed it to Bodaly. And so the church that was there the BBC had done a story on it called The Church That Never Was, but Still Is 300 years later. So there's some old history there in the background behind the church. When I was there, they said there's a field there, and in that field they said there's a lake, and on that lake there's an island, and that's where she's buried at. And so I soon found out that that's where we were, right next door to the Spencers, and Althorpe is the name of the land where Diana was raised. So it had a strong meaning to me while I was there tracking that land and walking that land to see our connection to the land. After coming back home here, I continued on my journey of learning more about our village sites here. And part of what I did before I left, before my mom passed, was I was able to put together my grandfather's history. So this is my grandfather in the center here, my mom's dad, and these are his siblings. And then up in the top, there's my great grandfather, Lachea, and that's the name that I carry of Lachea from my great grandfather, and my great grandmother's pictures there also. My grandfather, my mom was one of 9 children. So his brother here, Matisse, married a lady and had a daughter that had 17 children. The other daughter here married a man in Couch, and they had a daughter that had 17 children also. So there's a lot of cousins that are in our family that connect to those names. And it was so important to have their traditional name for me. My grandfather, his name was Siip, and he was a prominent figure in the Nanaimo area. My great grandfather, Johnny Lachea, they called him Johnny Snuneymuxw, was a nickname they had for him. So there's a lot of deep roots in Snuneymuxw here, even though my history goes back 1,000 years in England, back to the William the Conqueror. My history goes much deeper here in the Snuneymuxw area, and I'm really honored to have come forward from here and started studying the map of all the names. And you can see the Gabriola with all the names on Gabriola Island, and on Vancouver Island, there's a huge amount of names. So recently, as part of the project with Kate's school there, we were going to be interviewing Nanaimo knowledge keepers and elders. And so they came to my shop here and interviewed me to be the first one. And that was with Bill and a guy named Michael. But it turned out very nice to be able to read off all the Hokaminam names of Gabriola Island. And all the people that live on Gabriola Island have a strong connection to the lands where the petroglyphs are. And we have such deep connections to those people that made the petroglyphs, that created the petroglyphs. And that knowledge goes back in our history to 4,000 years ago. We always had a connection to the island, but there hasn't been anyone, unfortunately, living at the island for quite a few years. So my anticipation, my goals are to be able to be someday to be able to come back to that island and be in that residence there. I'm going to ask, is there any questions that people can think of, first of all, about my family history or my knowledge of my ancestry, what I shared so far? Send a message in the messenger, and then we'll figure that out. I'll take time to read it. Okay. One more picture I'd like to share is my grandfather's father and my grandmother's father. So these are my 2 great grandfathers. And now my grandfather on my right is Lachea, my great grandfather, and my other great grandfather is Lacuse or Lagus. And he comes from the Kwakwaka'wakw history. And so it was decided his parents would give him as a gift to the Coast Salish people to stop the wars that went on prior to 1900. So the last recordings of the potlatches that went on here were in Departure Bay. And there's that famous photo that I was sharing of Departure Bay where the potlatch was hosted at. And here's, again, the famous view of the longhouses in Departure Bay. It being our largest village site there was 3 rows of houses. So a very large village site, several thousands people live there. There's already a lot of connections to the people in the north because one of our elders in our community in the 1850s, 1860s, his sister had married to the Haida. And so they had asked that they bring her family down for their final potlatch of them coming here. But by that time, there was already a lot of wars that were going on. And when the family had finished the potlatch, there became a war going on in the Departure Bay. And the non-First Nations already had the newspapers here called the Nanaimo Daily Free Press. And it had recorded in that paper about the last war that went on in Departure Bay. When I was saying about my great grandfathers that came from the Kwakwaka'wakw history, his ancestors, when we trace his history back 300 years before this man here on my left here, this man, one of his ancestors came from Snuneymuxw. So even though he was grown and adult already, he had a potlatch here that went on for over 1 month. And while he had that potlatch, one of the songs he sang at that potlatch lasted for 6 days. And that's the shadow image I have in the bottom of the calendar I made in the year 2000. And the top images of my great grandfather and my great grandmother. She actually comes from Penelakut, which was used to be called Cooper Island, but her mother was from Snuneymuxw. And then the shadow image on the bottom is the house post, which is now in the museum in Victoria, which someday I'd love to be able to go look at and learn some more information about that of the Kwakwaka'wakw. So I'm one of the family members in the community here that shares this information with the other family members, and we're forever trying to connect each other together. I had wanted to share a family photo, although one of my cousins passed away. In this picture, each of us, 4 of us here, all of our grandmothers are sisters. And we felt that was important in 2006 to share that information. While I was living at the Songhees Reserve, I used to host a potlatch or a dinner. We didn't call it a potlatch, we just called it a potluck dinner. And so this was the last photo we did with all the people that arrived. And all I asked the people from the families there was to bring their favorite dish and be willing to be in a photograph at the end. So doing this group photo was a real honor for me, and several of the family members have all passed on now. But I really feel the importance of trying to bring this information to the future generations, to the young ones that are running around, to the young ones that aren't, some of them that aren't even born yet. It's important that they know who their grandparents, their great grandparents are. This is my grandmother and my grandfather, and they were married on March 13th, 1916. So in 2003, I created a calendar with that being the first month of that calendar. So I've been doing calendars and stuff for the communities and for the families for many years.
Dave, we have a couple of questions.
Sure, okay.
It says, Joan would like to know, when was the last potlatch?
The last one, it is, the potlatches are still going on. The potlatches, now this COVID stuff, we had to stop them all. Everything's been put on hold, but we still have potlatches. I had my own naming potlatch in 2005, where I received my great grandfather's name of Lachea. And that name was gifted to me by my aunt over in Squamish. Her mother was a sister to my grandfather. So this is her grandfather's picture here of Lachea. And so I received that name of Lachea, and that was in 2005. And I had over 200 people come to my naming in Nanaimo here. So we still have the potlatches, they're still going on. They're not as predominant as they used to be when there was no other events going on in Departure Bay. There were some huge celebrations that went on there. But we are still hosting potlatches, and we don't want to ever give them up, because it's something that's really brings our families back together, and I think that's something important.
Were they banned for a while though?
Yes, they were. Yeah, potlatches were banned from 1886 until 1951, and for reason for that was the Indian Affairs or the government of Canada said the families were giving away things that they shouldn't have been given away. And they couldn't understand the way our culture worked. In Snuneymuxw, we're called ambilineal people. We track the male or the female line, sometimes both lines of our ancestors. And the British said they were having these potlatches, and they were giving away sewing machines, but they didn't have any electricity, and they in the European way, that wasn't right for them to do that. So that's one of the examples. But at that time, we used to have a number or a certificate allowing us to leave the reserve if we were First Nations. They were so strict with us in Government of Canada that everyone had to have this pass in order to get off of the reserve, to leave and then come back. If we were caught without that pass, there's in Victoria, some of them were taken to the police headquarters, and there was mug shots done of them, and some of them were thrown in jail just because they didn't have a pass with them. So the restrictions were quite out of the ordinary in that, but they've since let that go. Once they repealed that law in 1951, we started having the gatherings more publicly again, and we invited other families to come to that. But one area that was really left behind us was our area of cedar weaving. Cedar weaving was something in Snuneymuxw where we were known as basket weavers. Our people would make baskets, and one of the sad, unfortunate stories were they were told in 1900 to bring their best baskets to a potlatch, which, when we think of it, potlatches were banned in 1900. But the Indian agent, in their sly ways, told the people to bring their best baskets. So they brought their baskets together, and he collected them all up and threw them in the fire, and told them, don't ever make these baskets again. So you can imagine the hurt and the deep despair that the people were put in after something like that. And so it's only my generation now that are the weavers that were picking it up from where it comes from my ancestry. We used to make baskets many years ago that were so tightly woven that they could hold water in them, and if they're done properly. I have one here that's close to that, but even mine doesn't come near to what the work was. We have about 6 weavers in Nanaimo now, but I teach people, whoever wants to learn, about making the headbands inside or making the bracelets that we make, that I make here. So is there any questions about that part of it?
There was a comment from Pam and a question. You are a knowledge keeper. Is this something that has been a position in your family history?
Good question. I hadn't thought about that, but I was told by one of the elders one time that it was always known that I was going to be doing this kind of work, that I was going to be the one to record the family history down. Someone, that elder, had told me, he said, before you were even born, it was already decided that that's what you were going to be doing. So I wouldn't say that I was ever coerced into it or anything. It's something that just came natural for me. I've been studying my history for many, many years, but I started putting the history on paper once I came home and I met my family here. When I was showing the picture of my grandfather, well, one more I'd like to share along that same line is of my grandmother. So my grandmother here is the 4th oldest of 10 children, and from the oldest one to the very youngest one, there's 26 years difference. By the time the last son was born in 1914, the oldest one already had 5 kids. So there's a whole generation shift of that. When I tracked the history of my great grandmother here, it was an arranged marriage to the man that's from the Kwakwakwa that was brought down from here as a peace bond to the people here. The history of my great grandmother here, her mother was a sister to my great grandfather, Lachea. So it was arranged marriages again. But when I go further back on the history of Lachea on my great grandfather's side here, that man's mother was half Hawaiian, and her mother came from the royal family of Hawaii. A lot of family connections. So when artists, if you have knowledge of this man, Lachea, had a brother that married over to Seashell Reserve. And at that time in the 1860s, 1870s, they couldn't pronounce that name Lachea. So they said, you'll be Mr. Johnny. Well, his brother was already first named Johnny, so his brother became Johnny. And he married over to Seychelles to a family on the reserve there, and then had a daughter, and the daughter's name was Susan. And she came back and married to a man, Wesley of Snuneymuxw here, and his son was Albert Wesley. And so that's Artist's line of how she connects up to my family. So Artist being a cousin of mine, her mom and my mom were cousins, but Artist's great grandfather was a nephew to my great grandfather. So there's a whole generation shift of that. So
We have a couple of more questions.
sure, okay.
Do you think your interest / professional experience in photography has informed the way you approach your genealogy research?
Yes, very good question, and very much so. In the work of photography that I still do, I still try to get group pictures of all the gatherings that I've had on, say, such an island. And this is one when I had lots of the leaders here. You can see one of the Nanaimo counselors here, Ben Giesbrick, Jim Turley on the back there from Turley's Flowers, Paul Manley back there, Gary Manson at the back. So when I do a group photo like this, I'm really honored to have a copy of that made, because every time we get together, it's good to show how we may be connected or how we know each other. And I've had times where someone's seen a group photo and they recognize their grandfather in that photo. And so we were able to use his picture for part of the family tree. Next question. No. Okay. When I say about my family tree, when I show the chart of my family tree, we only have the photos going back probably to the 1860s. I have one of them that I haven't added up here yet. My second great grandfather, or my third great grandfather, comes from Chilcote, Alaska. And then his daughter was married to Vancouver Island, 2 daughters married to Vancouver Island. One of them married to the Hunt family, and then the other one was my ancestors. On my family tree, where this chart came from, there was a little over 1,000 photographs on that family tree. I've had printed out pages of just one page of photographs, and it can hold 35 pictures onto one page. And I have names for probably 90% of them. And I remember scanning each one of those pictures in, or taking a picture of those to add them in. So the photography is a very important part of my work that I do. So, any other questions, Carol?
Do you know a way to help learn the place names if we're not in Kate's class?
Oh, okay. It's already a good question. Good question. It's already been suggested that we look at trying to put some place names on significant locations on Gabarola. And I think that's in the works already, that if we can put some place names there in Hulkaminum, it'll help people see that. And as long as we have respect from the people that we see it, that we don't see people removing those signs or anything, I think this would be really neat to do that. Put some information, and people can take photos of that, and then they have record of it. So, and then to take a class to try and learn how to pronounce those names is a whole nother task. When I say about pronouncing the names and the language and working within the language, in 1994, when I first moved home, I got a job right at the band office. And one of the first projects I got to work on was this one here. This is our Hulkaminum phonics. And this was in progress with the school district of Nanaimo, and the Nanaimo band, Snuneymuxw band, and Nanus, Snuneymuxw, Dominus, and Snuneymuxw. And so this picture here, it's hard to see it with a reflection on it, but these were the elders that were involved in them. And there's only one individual that's still left from all those people. All the rest have passed on. But it's a real honor for me to help work with this and help coordinate those meetings, as well as take the photographs of all the people that were there. And that went on for nearly 1 year of my time while I was working with the band.
I've noticed that you see Hulkaminum not spelt differently, but the apostrophes are in different places depending on where you read it. Could you talk about that a bit?
Yes, good question. That comes to mind, just brings this to mind here. I have two different dictionaries here. One of them was written by Cowichan tribes, printed by a family member in Saanich Reserve. The other one was written by Ellen White in Nanaimo. And each village has its own dialect. I had shared before that in Snuneymuxw here, we use the word hoppet, which means deer. In the village south of here, Staminas, or the one north of here, Snuneymuxw, they use the word smayeth. And they recognize the word of hoppet, but they said that's a Snuneymuxw word because it's much older than the words that they use. So even though the Cowichan tribes is largest reserve in British Columbia here, their cultural history is younger than Snuneymuxw, with being 10,000 years old here. So some of the words we carry, another one we use is called pish. Pish means cat in our language. The villages around here, north and south, they would use puus. Puus means cat. And the difference is they recognize that, but they also recognize pish also, but also say that's a Snuneymuxw word. Some of the dialects we had here in Snuneymuxw in Departure Bay even differed from our up the river reserve or over on Gabarola Reserve. That leads into the area of my old photos. I have some old pictures of the reserves here. Some of the old ones that I have here was, this one's a picture of right where the ferry goes over to Gabarola Island. This is that area there. They called it Cameron Island, was the point where that high rise is now. And that was one of our large village sites there. This was a drawing done in 1858. So there's a lot of old history. You can see in the background in the center, Protection Island and Sasachin Island in the background. So nothing that hasn't changed at all. But right where the ferries land, right there is where all those canoes are on the shore there, because that was all part of that village site there. Some of the longhouses that were on that land there were very large longhouses. Nice to find that, and I found that copy of that in they used to be called Harbor Park Mall, downtown Nanaimo, and they used to post up all the old pictures of the area there. One of the other ones that I found was the Nanaimo Harbor, the first map ever drawn of the harbor of what it looked like. And where the old museum was, that was an island up on top of that rock there. And you can see the water used to go all the way around it. And where the mall is, that was all in the area that was one of our soccer fields and one of our activity centers. So there's a lot of changes in the land where they filled it in and whatnot, and changed the face of the land. Here's another view of the places downtown with an overlay of what's there. The conference center now is in the center. The museum is in the center up above on the rock. And you can see even some of the view down in the marsh where there used to be a train track. You can see now what it looks like there with an overlay over top of it. So these are kind of interesting things. If anyone ever has a chance to come over to my shop, you could have a look at some of these things, because that's always of interest to me. And when I get a chance to share information. One other one I wanted to share is one down on our #1 reserve. This is where our present reserve is at. And on the right-hand side of this picture here, it's hard to see it though, Needham Street comes right down to the water here. And all these longhouses along here, right to this boathouse, there's 5 of them, and they belong to my great-grandfather, Lachea. So in 1895, that picture was taken, and he owned 5 longhouses there. So it was very significant man in our culture teachings for him to have that much connection. Someone said they may have been one for each of his children. So it's all a very important part of my family. A little bit more. Is there a question? Anything else, Carol?
There
Um,
isn't a question, but there's an interesting comment by Jennifer.
okay.
She said, I recently talked with a woman working at the Departure Bay Ferry Terminal who is a descendant of the Hawaiians who moved to Salt Spring in the 1800s. Such an interesting part of Gulf Island history.
Yes, yeah, and that was the Kanaka people, and that's where the town of I'm thinking now, Ganges. Ganges was a lot of Hawaiians had moved to there on Salt Spring Island, and there's a lot of descendants. The Sampson family comes from there. The Pattenberger family comes from there. There's other names that connect from that, and even the word Pattenberger was a name that descended from the Hawaiians. And so it's always nice to meet those people. And there's been books written about those, as well as the Portuguese people that have come here and have married to our community. So it's always good to find that information, and it does show how small our world is. I want to refer to one picture here back in my high school. When I was in high school, I took a photography course. And when I took a photography course, I was given a choice of what things I wanted to do a report on. So I did a report on film negatives, on the different sizes of negatives, from the Instamatic 110 to a 35 to 110 was a large one, but it was nice to find those. So then I had borrowed the photo negatives from my mom's collection. She had a drawer full of pictures and negatives. And so I used those into my report for my photography class. Unfortunately, later on, we had a fire and it burned all those negatives and everything. And so we lost all that. But I thought of it and I thought, hey, I've got some negatives from that. So I went and looked back through my negatives that I got. One of the negatives, I enlarged the picture up, was of a family reunion. In 1968, we had a gathering here with my grandfather in the center, with myself just behind my grandfather to the left, my older brother to the back, to the other side, to the right, my younger brother on the bottom right, my father back in the kind of the purple or blue kind of shirt, and my mom kind of behind my older brother. That's my mom's older brother at the back there, my mom's older sister and older brother at the other side, and then my grandfather in the front. So it was so neat to find that it was one of the only photos I was able to get. And it showed how close my mom and her sister were when we have 5 children all twinned with each other. And so real honored to have those kinds of connections to our family. So I'm always looking for more old photos when I get to see my family members, even in the States. I went down there and have taken pictures of their family photos to add to my collection. The most recent was in 2019. I traveled out to Kelowna, where my father's sisters live, and I took some pictures of their old photos that they had that connected to my family. When I tell about my great grandfather coming from the north and having a big potlatch, this is a picture of the house that collapsed right after he passed away. And that's down on our #1 reserve in Nanaimo here. And his potlatch was a Kwakwaka'wakw style potlatch. In his big house here, the entrance here, there was a cedar log in the center. If they were from the Kwakwaka'wakw ancestry, they would come in and go to the left. And if they were the Coast Salish, they would come in and go to the right, because of the cultures still being so different. But this is one of the first potlatches where he held both nations together. And it was a real show of unity. My great grandfather comes from the Double Wolf clan, and that's the picture on here that my ancestor come from. And when I say this potlatch went on for 1 month, one of the songs that he sang at this potlatch lasted for 6 days, and it was called the 6-Day Song. And that was the last time it was ever sung in my family. So I have that knowledge now that I pass on to the younger generations so that they can have an understanding of how important our potlatches and our culture is. And like I said earlier, I made calendars in the year 2000, put that shadow image on it. And every year I would give out these calendars to these people that were at the reunion, so they would have it for next year. Oh, I see a question there. The song didn't go for 24 hours a day. It would probably go 9 in the morning until 7 or 8 at night. I'm not exactly sure how much, but we just knew that that song was called the 6-day song. And so I'm not sure, they'd probably take breaks for meals and still sleep at night, but it would during the day of potlatching. But nonetheless, to have a potlatch that went on and having someone out collecting clams and oysters and collecting crustaceans from the ocean, some people in the mountains hunting, gathering deer and food, and feeding these people for a whole month was something that was not seen and witnessed in our community since then. But it was exciting to have some of that knowledge of that. When he married my great grandmother, it was an arranged marriage that they married to. It was arranged marriage that they have, and there's the only picture I have of his wife, my great grandmother. When I was looking through a map later on in life, I found this one here, and the one that's in color was on the National Geographic map. And she was one of the ladies recognized as one of the 28 First Nations women of North America. It was called Indian People of North America. So 1929, they took a copy of her picture and then drew it and colored it in and then placed it on the map. My great grandmother's name was Agnes Charlie, and she was from Penelakut Island. So it was really nice to find those kinds of things about that. So any questions, comments? Oh, I see there's a comment there, a question about the woolly dogs. I do have a little bit of information, but I forgot one of the pictures I was going to bring. I had printed out a picture of one of the woolly dogs, but I don't have much information on that. There are some people that are even doing some DNA now, and they're figuring of possibly trying to recreate that through the DNA. So sounds interesting. It's on the edge of creation kind of thing. So it kind of makes me a little bit nervous about doing that kind of stuff.
There was another question. Would
Yes.
the song be telling stories or history or something else?
Oh, yeah, it would be both stories and history and the lineage that he came from. Like I was saying, the knowledge was that my great grandfather's ancestor, 300 years before him, one of them came from Snuneymuxw here. And so we still have that name within our family, have a knowledge of that. So very important part of that. Some old history of that, and I try to grasp hold of what it would be like to sing for more than even a couple hours, but to try and do it for 6 days, we can't comprehend that in today's terms. It's just something so different. So, but an honor just the same. I know the importance of all that now, so I try to relay that to the younger generation so that they can have an understanding of that. When I was working down in, I used to work with the BC Treaty Commission in Victoria at the Law Chambers building in Bastion Square. And I did a lot of work at the museum. So I went and documented all the photos of old pictures in the museum. And I came across this picture, and it was kind of a neat old photo. And it said, Indian people unknown. And when I looked at it and I looked closely, I thought, that's my grandfather right there. So the man came over and marked on the back of the photograph that this was identified as Abraham Johnny, my grandfather. And this is his sister, Elizabeth, in front, and his brother, Matisse, be on the other side. And so it was really nice to have a copy of that picture to put into my collection. But back then, they didn't know who any of the people were. They just had it as unknown Native people. It's kind of fun finding those old photos and putting the connections in. Another example of an old photo was one of the elders from the Songhees Reserve came to visit me in my office, and he brought this neat old photo. And this is taken right in front of the Empress Hotel in Victoria. And you can see the people lined along the edges there and all the way down to the stairs. But they were hosting the Governor General Lord Willingdon and his wife, and they're on the canoe in the center, and they were hosted by the Songhees people. So they had to come and be picked up by canoe and brought to the Songhees Reserve. But it was so neat to see the old canoes of the Songhees pullers. The original photo was just a 5x7. And once I scanned it in, I was able to zoom in and see who the people were. And through the newspapers, I was able to get other angles of the same photograph. But the elder that brought the picture to me said that he seen it and bought it at a garage sale for 25 cents. So neat to find a picture of that importance for such a cheap price. But it was neat to find 1927 photographs. So since then, of 1994, I've been involved in traveling with the tribal journeys, which is the canoe journeys. They come across the areas here. This was a picture taken in 2015 on Sasatchewan Island, which was at the time Newcastle Island, now is Sasatchewan. And all the canoes that came and landed and docked there before they continued on their journey launched there. So each one of those canoes had to be given permission from our chief and council and our leadership and our reserve here to come onto our shores and rest and recuperate and have some food and sing some songs. So it was really a neat journey while they were traveling. And I think in 2015, I can't remember where they were traveling to, but I remember the time of seeing those there. One more view of that same area there is looking from the canoe angle, and you can see downtown Nanaimo in the background there. So really neat thing for me to be the photographer for these kinds of gatherings and document them all. So I'm always looking to document events going on. When I look back at my own events that I've documented, one of the most famous ones, I have a large picture of it in my shop here. If anyone comes here and has a look, is this one here, and it's of the tribal journeys. This picture was taken right in front of the Empress Hotel, looking down onto the water. And if we look closer, we can see that there's everyone's identifiable in it. There were 54 canoes that came into the harbor at that time, and that was in 1997. So real honor for me to be a photographer of that event and to document that. And now look at it 23 years later, we've moved on. When I look to the north, and I've worked with the families in the north, I've gone to many, many potlatches, and I've been honored to document some of those potlatches. This is one of my family gathering in Alert Bay. I come from the Wannock family and from the Laguse family from Village Island. And this was a potlatch they call a Galitna potlatch. And if you can see on the floor in front of these people, these are 1 gallon bottles of hooligan oil. Hooligan oil comes from the hooligan fish, and it's the highest form of potlatch that can ever be hosted. And again, that was really an honor to be part of that in that big house there. And documenting photos of those events where they're honoring all the chiefs and honoring the families and everything. Has been a real honor for me to be part of that. Because I come from the Wannock family, the Wannocks had hired me to be their documenter, and the Umasta Museum has 2 videos that came from me in their museum collection. If anyone heard of the Umasta Museum, it's right in Alert Bay. But some amazing photos. I think when I took this picture, up behind me in the back was David Suzuki. He was part of that gathering also. So it's a real honor to meet some dignitaries that are known throughout the world. And his mother is actually connects to the Hawaii, or to the Haida ancestry, sorry. So another part of my journey has been a unique venture, which I always continue to like to share with, is in 2012, I had rescued a wolf, a white wolf, which was very rare. And I ended up receiving the puppy from that white wolf, which became my stakea. And he passed away in 2016 of unfortunate circumstances, but the joy of that life that he had when I had him, this is over on Salt Spring Island, and a friend had invited me over to there, and just the happiness of him anytime he was near water. There was such a neat venture. A unique venture while I had that wolf was when I shared a little bit of a video before, I think a few weeks ago, about an eagle. I'd seen this eagle in a tree, and I ended up getting a picture of Stakea. So Stakea and the Yahwala is the name of the eagles. So having both of them in one photograph that I took was so important. And to see this eagle and get that close to it without it flying away, realizing that it was injured. So I wrapped it up and put it in my coat and brought it to couch, and where they would look after those birds and fix them up. Well, 5 months later, they had brought that bird to healing and brought it back, and they asked me to let it go on their land. So CTV News came here, and all the press from the news presses, they came and took a picture of him. Got a friend videotaped it for me, Frederick Robinson, and got video of the eagle flying away from us. So the CTV took me out to the fields to interview me and asked me about the eagle, where the eagle was at, and some of the history. So it was neat to even to see that eagle back in the trees again, recognize it. In our cultural way, that eagle will recognize me for the rest of its life. And if I'm in that land, on my land again, where he lives at, the family said he will bring his mate to me and show me who he is, who the mate is, the female. And when I was walking there, was in the fields with my older sister one time, sure enough, he was there. At the time when he was being released, that movie came out called Eddie the Eagle, about the British man that was a skier, I guess, in the Olympics. And so they nicknamed this one Eddie the Eagle. So it's kind of neat to have a name for him right away called Eddie. And I think the start of the story was Eddie the Eagle is back in the air. But it was neat to be able to recognize that ancestral, the important part of the culture of that. And anytime we see an eagle is good luck in our culture, we call them the watchers of the sky. And when I had one personally that was named and had a connection to me, where I had to hold on to that eagle and had to help bring it back its life, it would give it back its life. It was a real honor for me in our cultural way. And so I have a strong connection to that. After that time of having him was when Stakea had passed away. My name used to be Dave White Wolf, but I changed it to Spirit Wolf, because the elders had told me that that spirit of that wolf will be with me for the rest of my life. So real honor to have that. Continue looking for other events. I tried to travel when the tribal journeys were on every year, of documenting the canoes of traveling along the coast here to go into different areas, to also taking pictures of our own canoes and our own gatherings in Snuneymuxw here, with all the our canoe races that we had in downtown Nanaimo. And it was nice to get some good pictures of that, and then see how our families have grown up over the years. So it's like a progress photo. So is there any questions or comments about that?
I have a question about the canoes, actually.
Good.
So there's a canoe carver, but I saw in some of those photos that you showed that the canoes were elaborately painted. They were beautiful, beautiful paintings. Does the carver learn how to paint, or do they work with different artists?
Good question. That there's quite a few of them that are artists themselves, but there's also some that will work with the artist. And when you see specifically that photo I shared here on Sesatchin Island or for me Newcastle, you can see each one has a resemblance of a creature or bird or something. That's what the name of their canoe will be named after. The one that I traveled on at that time, I traveled on a few times, was called the Zunaquatsis in the Kwakwak culture, in the Kwakwak words. That means the wild woman under the sea. And that was painted onto the side of that, the eagle and the wild woman. And some of them are even elaborately painted on the inside also with designs. Those designs also are built and drawn on there to help protect the families. There's a protection that comes about in our culture when we have that creature, when we recognize one of the animals or something in our ancestral way, we're putting a protection over our family. And when we're on that water, we have to always be aware to protect ourselves and protect our families. and to have that respect for the sea, because the sea is there for us to get around and to do where we need to go to, but it also can take a life away if we aren't careful.
So I'm full of questions today, Dave.
Okay. Yeah.
First question is, you definitely love genealogy. Do
Yeah.
other band members want to work with you for their genealogy? Because there must be a lot of crossover.
So true. Yes, so true. On the family tree, I thought of bringing it, but I didn't get around to digging it up. I'm in the presence of paring and thinning out my stuff. I have to pare all my stuff and get rid of my stuff, because in 2.5 months, my house is going to be demolished. So I have to pack things up into boxes and move it on somewhere else once I find another place. So that's why I'm hoping to find a place on Gabriola. So, but I love taking pictures, tracking the history, and sharing with many families. In 1998, I worked with the Songhees Reserve when I was working with the Treaty Association, the Tomok Treaty. And in 1998, I created the Songhees Archives. And that gave me a strong connection to the Songhees. So when I used to host the family gatherings at the Songhees, there was a lot of family members that came out to support what I was doing because they were part of the family tree. And when I showed this picture here earlier of the family at the Songhees Reserve there with 58 people all in the gathering there, that was a small portion of the family members that connect up to that family. But a real honor to be able to give them their knowledge of who they are and where they come from, because that's our cultural belief, that we have to know who we are and where we come from in order to know where we're going. And that's part of what I share all the time.
That's great. Thank you. Okay, my last question.
Okay.
Modern potlatch.
Yeah.
It is an incredible endeavor to put a potlatch together, from what I know from past studies. In modern times, it must be an even greater endeavor to get all those people together, and financially. So is there, can they only happen, say, every 2 years or 5 years, or how do they manage to budget for that big party?
Good question and question and question. In our cultural way, in the Coast Salish, we're a very unique culture here. Like I said, we're called ambilineal. We track both the female line or just one line. But when I arranged for my own potlatch here, it took me 4 years to plan it. In our cultural way, we can't do something too suddenly. You never hurry through anything. You just work through it and keep planning and planning, because from the cooks to the plannings to the dancers to the celebration, it all has to be arranged by the person that's doing that. And it was a very unique situation. I lived in Victoria at the time, and I arranged it in Snuneymuxw. And so I came up to Snuneymuxw several times in preparation for that, and had the dances with the practicing of the women, of the songs that they're going to sing. And it took a lot of preparation. So I would say in excess of $11,000 it came out and that I distributed on that one day. And it was such an honor to be of that 4 years of culminated work. But now that I carry the name of Lachea, it's not just about carrying the name, it's about living the life and doing work for our community. And that's what I really believe. That's my job, is to put that forward, to pass that knowledge on to people. So hoping that helps a little bit.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Big undertaking in the Kwakwaka'wakw culture. It has to be the whole family, as many families. Sometimes it can be 200 to 300 family members, and every family member has to come forward and to contribute their money towards it, as the family leaders and whatnot. In the West Coast, I don't know too much about those areas there, but they also would encourage their whole family to be involved in it. So very unique. A couple of other old photos I find here. This is one that I found that's in the archives. It's all around. This is one of the first photographs ever taken of Snuneymuxw. And the man in the front here with his wife was named Saknustin, and he's the father of the wise. His wife's name was Thostonot, and she came from the Musqueam Reserve. The daughter over on the left, on this left of my left here, is she married up to Nanoose Reserve, and that's where the Nanoose families come from. The lady way over on the right here, she married over to Penellicut Island, and then her daughter married over to a Lummi Reservation. So we have family connections over in Lummi, lots of family over that way there. And I don't know the history of where the other lady went to. But after 2 years after this picture was taken in 1850, in 1852, they had a son born. His name was Joe Wise. And this was a photo taken in the inner harbor of Nanaimo with him on his canoe. And you can see the bastion in the center at the back there. And so it was a very significant photograph of that. And so I'm working with the museum presently in downtown Nanaimo to try and enhance that area there of building a Sasatchewan Island display. And they have that photograph on display there, but they don't have that actual canoe or a canoe like that. So I'm encouraged them to try and see if we can find a canoe that belongs to the Salish that we could possibly bring for that display and keep that for part of it. Another photo that looks very similar. This is my mom's sister was Clara was here, and Daisy was at the back, and they're in like a kind of like a rowboat or kind of like a boat my grandfather had made, and that's Gabriola in the background there. And they're in the harbor here for their last photos. The day after this picture was taken, my aunt, she left to California and married down there to Washington State, and then she passed away in California, and she was 93 years old when she passed away. But very interesting information to find photographs like that when I find that they're a family connection. There was someone came here in the 1850s and had drawn some images of the Snuneymuxw people. There's no names that were attached to it, but we're still searching to see if we can maybe find some of those information of who those people were. But they're significant within our community. And I feel sometimes when I see the man here that I have a family connection to him. So I'm always looking. So I had even a copy of that one made for my own collection enlargement. It's because it's such a neat photo to see those. So. Any thoughts or comments or questions?
Could you tell us a little bit about that headdress?
Okay, which one that was wearing?
One of the people was in a cedar hat, it looked like, and the other one, what would that have been made out of?
This would have been, you can see the shells or those little white shells that hang around the front. You can see them sometimes on the beaches on Gabriola, but there was in the area here. The cedar would have been right on the top. That's a spray of cedar, and it's all individual pieces of it that were cut, and it's all propped up and made to look like, you can see the shells that come down the sides down here. These were called Dentillia Shells, and I have a necklace that's made out of Dentillia shells that I got from California. Dentillia shells are a snail, like a little long snail shell, and it was used as a form of currency prior to Europeans. And so people could find those shells. They're very rare, but there's a few of them around. And to make necklaces out of them was a really common thing, to have that as a memory. So to see him with that regalia there, and possibly a lot of that is made also out of wool. There's a lot of wool we used. And sometimes we would use that wool that came from the woolly dog. Like along the front of his forehead there, it's kind of a pattern that's on it, and that may be a woven wool or knitted, so to speak, wool, and it's about created that as a headpiece. And then the loose wool would be the more spread over the top, but probably cedar up on the top. He's definitely got a cedar kind of a shawl on, and the edges of it would have some sort of mink fur or something, so it's not so rough against the skin. But that was our clothing that we wore.
We have a question.
Sure.
By EJ. These were drawn by Spanish, right?
That's right. Yeah, that's right. If anyone knows
okay.
his name, that would be nice. Yeah.
Do you think the artist took liberties with the beard and mustache, or would it have really looked that way?
Good questions too, because there's no one really has an definitive answer of that. But I really believe that the Spaniard guy was trying to draw as best as he could what he could see. When I look at the picture of the other man here, I've seen even some of my cousins have that same little mustache and look. So it's sometimes a look on us. The petroglyphs is definitely something that's our cultural thing that's from Nanaimo area here. And again, it's something that's wrapped all the way around his chin, may have been wool around it. Remember when I was saying earlier that we use that as protection in our cultural ways. Definitely this is in protection for them, and each one of them are dressed appropriately for that. The family connection to Musqueam. I have a lifelong, what was that question, Marta? I've just seen it for a second there. From when I say in that man's name was Saknustin, and he was the father of all the wises of all the family here, and his wife was Thostanot. Thostanot was the lady who came from Musqueam. And her descendants, now her family descendants, are the Sparrow family that are over in Musqueam. So there's lots of families that are connected to the Sparrows, including the Garons and a lot of the other names and whatnot. But she was the one that married over to here, and her youngest child was Joe Wise. And Joe Wise was the father that had the 7 wise daughters. Because from his second wife, he had 1 son from his first wife, and then 7 daughters and 1 son from his second wife, which is 3/4 of our reserve now. Any other thoughts or comments? I'm hoping I'm sharing some good information. I'm always honored to share when people are interested and whatnot. When I was sharing the picture, similar sound to her name. Yes, the sparrow. Yeah, a sparrow name. Thostanot. They call it Tostanot, I heard now. Yeah. When I shared this picture here of my great grandmother and her having a picture of her on the National Geographic map, and all they said on the map on the National Geographic was a Quaguth Indian or Quaguth woman. But she was actually from Penellicut, from Cooper Island. Her husband was actually Quaguth. But it was really neat to see the original picture and see where they had drawn her, and that her face had turned a little bit more towards the camera when they had finished that. When I worked with one of the elders here that helped me out so much in a lot of my work, when I showed her that picture there, she was so honored to see it. I even have her photo up here. Her name was Margaret James, was one of my main teachers in all my cultural ways that I have here. When she seen that picture, she said, "That's my mom." And it was such an honor to have this elder identify that individual. So it was such a neat to find those times of sharing their history and sharing that with them for the first time too, to see it on the National Geographic map. So. Any other thoughts or comments?
I'm going to check in with you, Dave. It's been an hour now. How are you feeling? Do you have some more that you'd like to share, or do you think you'd like to wrap it up?
Yeah, maybe I could look at wrapping it up. I've always enjoyed sharing this. If people are ever in the Nanaimo area, I'd be honored for you to come and see my shop here at 2300 Bowen Road. And I'm called the Arts Collaborative. My business partner, Bo Wagner, and myself, he carves the canoes in the next building over. And then I host the Cedar Weaving classes here. Next week, on the first week of February, I'm going to have a unique group here because I have 8 children that are coming here, and they're only from age 4 to age 6. So I was saying before, I have the X's all marked on the floor here where people can stand. And so I'm going to have the little kids stand around the table here, and I'll share with them some of the work that we do here. And I'll set up some of the items that are closer to the edge of the table so that the individual that's standing next to this artwork could hold that up for the other kids to see. And that's what I've done in the past. It's been really a lot of fun. So next week I have, later this week on Thursday, I have to go to the Nanaimo Youth Services. I think NICE they're called, NICE, Nanaimo Youth Services, and they're located right downtown on Bastion Street. And I'm going to teach 8 children there how to make the cedar bracelets. And so that'll be my next class there of doing that. Another group will be coming here called Katimavik the first week of February, and I'm going to be giving them a tour and then possibly sharing a little bit more of Beau's area too. So I'm looking forward to opportunities to bring people here. I can host gatherings here. Now with the expanded, we used to have a table across the end, which cut the room probably a 1/3 of it away. But we've now expanded out here and we can now host up to 16 people. So thank you everyone for coming to learn about my cultural ways, my things that I share with. If you have any questions, please keep in contact through Carol or contact me directly. But I'm honored to help out when I can. And in our cultural way, Headdress, Yam, in our respect for Snuneymuxw, please remember that a lot of this stuff I share is Nanaimo history. So Headdress, thank you. Okay.
And thank you, Dave. I'd just like to present you this on behalf of the Gabriola Arts Council. And it's been a wonderful experience working with you. I know community has really loved your presentations and the guest speakers, elders, and other knowledge keepers that you have brought with you. So we hope to do more of these in the future. And until then,
awesome. Thank you. Thank you for the gift. Awesome. Good. Thank you everyone for coming out again. I'm glad to share with you. In the new, further in the year, we'll hear more good news of what the Arts Council is doing next. Awesome.
Okay. Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye, Kate. Thanks again.